All right, and welcome back to another edition of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, recorded live from an undisclosed location south of the Mason-Dixon line. Unfortunately, Alex is not with us on this one because he sassed me. I put him in timeout, but he'll be back on, I'm sure, if he behaves himself. But anyway, got a really awesome guest with us. Tim Larkin. We're going to get into his target focused training and just everything that he's about. I'm a huge fan of Tim's work, so it was a big deal to have him here on the show. But before we get into it, make sure you like, you subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, the best way you could do it is just tell a friend, tell someone who's in it, someone who's interested in making themselves stronger, faster, harder to kill. That's what we're about here. Pass this along, and whatever platform you're listening to, if you would, just give us a 5-star review if you like it. If you don't, then just let it pass like a ship in the night, and we'll call it good. So anyway, Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, before we get into it, I want to try to talk as little as possible, which is usually a problem for me. Oh, one last thing, just for listeners, I don't have a speech impediment. I just, big news for me, I got my braces off. This is round 2 for me wearing them in my life. I had them when I was a teenager. Finally got them off, but I've got this permanent, or not a permanent, I've got a retainer that has to stay in. So I'm kind of refamiliarizing myself with the English language. So I apologize if I sound kind of funny. That's why I'm going to try to talk as little as possible, because Tim's got some pretty important stuff to say. So without further ado, Tim, would you just tell us, for the viewers who don't know you, a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into your work.
Yeah, probably I'm best known for a tagline that yeah, I've used that partial part of it as a book title, but basically, it's violence is rarely the answer, and that's the part that we all kind of inherently know. But the
Yeah.
second part of that statement that I have is, but when it is, it's the only answer. And to me, that's the interesting part of the whole idea of self-protection, and really protecting yourself is the we all know when violence isn't the answer. We all know kind of when it's inappropriate and all that. Everybody's easy about pointing that out. The uncomfortable part is when actually it is the answer, and how do you define that, and how do you communicate that, because the challenge
Mm-hmm.
is it can seem like you're advocating violence, and that's not the case at all. You're clearly defining the rare black swan situation where the tool of violence is absolutely necessary. And so then the second idea that I came up with, if that is a true statement, then how do we reverse engineer violence so that we can harness the tool effectively? Because right now, violence, the idea of studying violence, has been so stigmatized in the press and in polite society that we've effectively made the tool really only available to the predators.
Mm.
And that's recently a big change in the American way of life. We've always been very pro self-defense, pro victim, and pro civil, citizens' rights, and that's
Right.
kind of all been turned on its head, especially in the last couple of years. And so I think the message is just that much more important. If you want me to give background,
Yeah,
like
just
how?
tell us, like, for those who aren't familiar with you. I mean, we'll get into
Okay.
your work, but kind of tell us how you got started and your background a little bit.
So I'm a Navy kid, and I'm going to give the Reader's Digest. Any part of this you want more information on, I'll give it to you. But basically,
Yeah.
I was a Navy kid. My dad was an officer in the Navy. I lived all over the country and overseas. And two things I learned from that. Moving every 2 to 3 years, it disrupts your whole social circle and everything, and also different parts of the country. Like all different.
Mm-hmm.
Culturally, our country is very different in
Oh
areas.
yeah.
You're in the
Oh yeah.
South right now, and
Right.
I would go from the deep South to Southern California, or then to New England, where you're at.
Yeah.
And it's just culture is all very differently. And how you communicate's different. And also
Mm-hmm.
the triggers that can bring on violence is different. And so at a young age, I got inculcated with that. And I was very lucky. My dad was deployed a lot, He was a surface warfare officer, so he's on boats all the time, ships all the time, and gone. But what I had was I had surrogate dads basically at all the bases. We had basically young Marines that would be our coaches. They'd teach us, want to play baseball, soccer, football. They would be our coaches. If we wanted to learn any sort of a martial art or combat sport, they basically were our coaches. And you could go on base and learn. And so you got growing up, I had a very positive, male role models that I could work with as a kid, and I'm a kid of the 80s too. So obviously it was the Reagan years. It was the Arnold
Right.
years. All these, even though they were exaggerated male role models, you were going for, that type of a thing. So it's interesting. We had all that. And we always thought that was normal and took it for granted. What I learned though was that when I got to San Diego, my dad he's one of his last places was San Diego, and the officer housing that we were in was in Coronado, California. And it was at the NAB Coronado. And my house that we had, the house that we were assigned, had a chain link fence. And on the other side of that chain link fence was a small little highway called the Silver Strand Highway. And right across there, like literally, I could probably look, if you see like a country road, it was like looking across a country road, and there it was, this huge obstacle course with, Constantine wire and everything. We're going, what is this? My brother and I had no idea what this was. And it turned out that was basic underwater demolition school. And it was where they trained these guys called the SEALs, which back in, I think I got there in 79. And back then, I know it's going to be crazy for everybody to think of this because they're so popular now. Nobody really knew about the SEAL teams. And, they knew about underwater demolition teams, UDT, because back then it was called, BUDS was Basic Underwater Demolition School. And SEALs was the S. And it was very different back then. But I didn't know there was a job like this out there. I mean, my dad never talked about it. And, you're a young kid. I think I was like 13, 14 years old. And I couldn't believe there was a job out there. You could, jump out of airplanes, blow things up, shoot automatic weapons, wear really cool sunglasses and run around. My brother and I just basically thought that was our own playground. And the only reason we kept sneaking in over there. And the only reason they kept us was because I had read in, I think, a Soldier of Fortune magazine or something as a little kid, hey, if you take a piece of carpet and you throw it over the Constantine wire, you can crawl over it. And so my brother and I basically did that, and they were so impressed that they let us sit up on the berm and watch everything. And then the instructors would talk to us. So we had no idea what this was, but I thought this was normal. So I knew everything about SEAL training. I knew every aspect of it. And I announced to my mom and dad that this is what I wanted to do. And, that was met with just shock because back then there was no career path for an officer in the SEAL teams back then, in Spec War. It was kind of the redheaded stepchild of the Navy. And I got a scholarship. I'm fast forwarding through. I got a scholarship, an ROTC scholarship. I attended USC, and that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to be, in there. And they discouraged you heavily. But this is, I'd done martial arts my whole life. My grandfather taught me about martial arts as a young kid. Fighting was something that was just normal when you moved to new schools. Everybody tests the new kid. So I was very comfortable with violence, like that. Mainly, I would call it asocial or antisocial aggression, basically, not real true violence, but fighting was the norm for me. They made it very hard for you as a scholarship student to apply for the SEALs. The year I went, there was only 2 slots for officers. It was in there, and I got one of them. And I was up against 2,500 candidates that were applying for that. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because I went to extremes to get one of these slots. I flew through it. I knew everything about training. My class, we were the number 1 guys. We won Hell Week. I was one of the top 3 guys in the 5.5 mile swim. Pool comp was easy for me. I had a couple of weeks before I was training, and I was super arrogant. I was like the golden boy there. I was in competition to be the anchor man of the class, which is where you're at. But as the lead officer, I got to choose where I want to go, and I had already chosen. Back then, you wanted to go to SEAL Team 4. If you saw Narcos on Netflix, any of the Narcos things. That's the problem that was being worked on in South
Mm,
America. It was
mm-hmm.
counter narcotics. It's the only action that was happening back
Yeah.
then. And so that's where I was going. And then I already had my plan. I was already going to go to then SEAL Team 6. I'd
Yeah.
planned my whole career out.
Oh yeah.
And then reality hit me. Had a no big deal dive that I had to do 3 weeks out from graduation,
Uh-huh.
and I went to do it, and I was congested that day.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I had already had some ear issues when I was a kid. I had small eustachian tubes, so I knew pressurization was always going to be a challenge for me. But I was so arrogant that I usually could have skipped this dive and then redone it on the weekend. But they had
Yeah.
just started giving us weekends off, and I needed to
Yeah.
drink beer and meet women.
Yeah.
And
Right. Right.
so yeah,
Priorities.
like every knucklehead, I went out
Yeah.
and I forced the dive. And when we were tying on, it was a typical UDT mission where you're practicing putting haversacks of explosives on like what they call Jap scullies and stuff, and all the different traditional UDT amphibious missions.
Mm-hmm.
Clearing an amphibious lane. So I was cranking down, trying to put my haversack on, and there's waves that come above the water and waves come below. Well, a wall of water hit my ear just perfectly when I was congested. Boom, blew my eardrum. Uh,
Wow.
a rush of cold seawater goes right up to the middle of my head, right into my inner ear, and then warm water. I just felt warm fluid coming out of me, and as soon as that fluid emptied, I lost all ability to value. I went into vertigo, and I lost all
Wow.
semblance of balance and what way was up. Completely disoriented. Um, I found the tow rope, the anchor line to the IBS boat that was up above where the instructors were, and I started pulling myself up that. That was the only way. It was like at dusk, so you really couldn't
Mm-hmm.
see anything. I'm pulling myself up, and they said when my head hit the surface that I was slapping uncontrollably with blood coming out of my ears. They pull me up
Wow.
on there. The corpsman, starts working on me right away. He looks in. He takes a light to look into my ear, and I could tell from his reaction right then and there that it was done.
Mm.
I could tell like my ears were done, and like I was not going to be able
Wow.
to pressurize dive. And so here's everything. Here's the golden
Yeah.
boy, and you
Yeah.
go from being top of the food chain to just this pariah because you treat you be in the military. Any guy that gets
Yeah.
injured or anything, oh, it's like
Oh yeah.
bad luck. You got to stick away. So I
Yeah.
thought my
Yeah.
life was over. But what was interesting, the reason it's worth hearing that story is because I want everybody to understand I was bigger, faster, stronger. I was
Mm-hmm.
unstoppable. Pain. I worked through everything. This was the first time I had ever been really given to deal with a true injury to the human body where I lost all control. I couldn't will my way out of it. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't work through the pain, had nothing. I literally lost control of my
Yeah.
body. And what's funny is what I thought was really the end of my career and the career that I wanted actually was the nexus, the starting point
Right.
for what I do now. Because now what I teach people to do is, hey, where else on the human body are these areas where we can put trauma into these areas and the person can lose their ability to use their brain to control their body? And that when I look back on it, what again I thought was the worst day of my life ended up kind of being something that started my mission. And
Yeah.
that's really what we
Well,
did. So
that's so interesting because I do want to get into your work, of course, but you just brought something that I think, as far as a life lesson, that is so hard sometimes to grasp. Because I had something kind of similar to you, which no need to get into it, but I kind of had a similar path early on the first round of my military career, and kind of same thing, kind of went into a disastrous stint into ROTC when I came out of did a green to gold. The Army had a green to gold program where you come out enlisted, you go and get commissioned, and same thing. Everybody, I thought special operations kind of where I want to go, and at the time that it was a career killer. Like, you just, if you were going to be an officer, everybody was like, why are you going to do that? This is going to ruin your career. You're never going to make it, and I was like, well, anyway, long short, I ended up getting injured. I had a long break in service, but it was devastating to me when that happened because I didn't have a plan B. And this is before YouTube and social media where you could find out about, like, you just had no information, right? So I didn't know
None.
about all these alternative career paths or anything else out there. All I knew is like, this is what I wanted to do, and now I didn't have that avenue anymore. And it wasn't just like I felt like my career had ended. I felt like my life had ended.
Yes. Yeah,
Because
I can
it
totally relate
was,
to that.
yeah. And
And,
I just love the fact that, and it really comes to how you frame things. There's nothing objectively that would have said, well, that's the end of your life, but it was how I was framing it. And when you frame it in a negative way, then you really do close out any avenues to really find prevail over those circumstances. But I like how, like with you, you're like, what looked like it was a career ended really started your career, right?
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
a series of events happened after that injury that led me into a military career that I had no business having. I ended up being this thing started. The reason, when you and I went through and they would discourage you on special operations, it all kind of changed in the late '80s when we went purple, and we had all of a sudden they had the creation of the U.S. SOCOM. And then every academy guy wanted to get in there now, because now you had
Yeah.
a career path, and it was a big
Mhm.
command, and you could become a star. You could get your stars and do all that, which in some ways kind of ruined the community in a little bit of ways, because the legend that I always loved when I went through was, in '04, a junior officer, relatively junior officer, compared to, like, flag officers, he would tell a two-star to go to hell if he thought the mission was wrong. He would protect his
Mhm.
guys. He would not.
Yeah.
He had no. It was all about the mission. It was all about making sure that your guys were there. It was not a question of whether or not you take the mission. Our guys were fearless
Mhm.
that way. But if it was a bad mission, they had no problem speaking up against people.
Yeah.
And that all kind of, when it became a viable, a viable career,
Yeah. Yeah.
you had some people take advantage of that and get in it. That again were more political than
Yeah.
practical, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right.
Anyways, that's my
Yeah.
soapbox on that. Um,
Yeah.
for me though, it was interesting. They liked me. I graduated. I completed buds. They gave me completion on there, which I thought was really nice of them, because they didn't have to do that. I mean,
Mhm.
yes, I did get through everything and do all that, but yeah, it's on my DD-214, it says I completed buds. Um,
Sweet.
but I couldn't get my trident.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, do you got one more time? You got one more thing for another life lesson?
Yeah.
Real
Yeah,
quick,
man.
that's worth
Yeah.
seeing. And I'll tell you, this
Yeah.
is the integrity issue that was there. Now, listen, I am a very persuasive person when I want to be, and so
Yeah.
I went to this command, Naval Special Warfare Command. It literally was a plank owner in it. It was the first time. It was a command that under U.S. SOCOM, our Admiral Lemoyne was the first one. He controlled literally all the teams other than JSOC. He
Mhm.
had all the conventional teams together. So it was the first time we had a unified command like that. I was select. They sent me to Intel school in Dam Neck, and I came back, and they gave me a slot that really belonged to an '05, '06. And I'm like, I'm
Mhm.
barely. I think when I got there, I was still an ensign, and I became a JG when I got there. And here I am, this guy. Then I get modified grooming standards. So we could grow our hair out and stuff, because we
Oh,
had to
nice.
travel. I had to travel to
Yeah.
a lot of places, and we would pretend to be civilians, and we'd meet up. But I by far was the youngest guy that would show up at these
Yeah.
meetings, and they just trusted me. They knew I knew the community. Granted, I had no experience. I had no wartime experience, but I did know the community. I'd gone through training, and by assigning me to that position, they didn't have to take an active duty SEAL who had a good,
Mm.
good, because we didn't have the bodies when we first got there.
Yeah.
We were by far the smallest special operations group, and so the Army was outstriping us because they had so many personnel. We only had a
Yeah.
couple of thousand. I think the Army started with 30,000
Yeah.
when we got in there. So it was a numbers game, and they used me to plug a number and gave me a job I had no business having. So that said,
That
I
sounds
got
like the military. Yeah.
oh yeah, I got put
Yeah.
into a situation where I was
Yeah.
with literally the legends of the SEAL team. The Admiral picked
Wow.
really great guys, Vietnam era guys, all the guys that had all the relevant comment, and they were my I was amongst them. So they
Yeah.
started looking. They realized when the wall came down, they started looking at hand-to-hand combat. And so that's how I got involved with what I'm doing now. But the more interesting part that I want to say for life lessons. So
Yeah.
here I am, this this now JG. I'm briefing everybody all the time. They love my work. I'm doing good work, and
Hmm.
I'm bringing us in, and I'm representing us well. And so the guys, they take me. We'd go camping together. We'd go do a lot of things. We'd do shooting, hunting. It was really cool. So they all would say, "Oh, it's ridiculous. There's no reason you shouldn't be on, the teams and stuff. Let's get you a waiver. Let's get you a waiver." And that's what they started to do. Well, they all liked me, and I got all the way up to, I remember at the XO at the time was Captain Smith, Ray Smith, who went on to become, I think, a 3-star, later. But Ray
Yeah.
was there, and he supported it, and he even told me, he goes, Tim, he goes, my years are terrible. He goes, I probably, if I had to go through it again, I probably couldn't do it, and so he signs it off, right? And I'm thinking, great, I'm golden. I'm going to get a waiver for my
Yeah.
ears. I get to do it. I can still get to, I can still get to 6 if I want. I'm already planning my
Yeah.
whole career,
Yeah.
And now I know all these senior guys. So now I know how to. So the admiral sees me, because the admiral has to sign off on it now, because it's gone all the way up. He sits me
Yeah.
down, and he sits me down, and he goes, man, Mr. Larkin, he goes, I got to tell you. He said, I have just enjoyed having such a young guy on my command. I mean, he buttered me up. He told me what great work I was doing. And,
Uh-huh.
and just he goes, for such a young officer to have to be taken in by these guys. He goes, a lot of these men I've worked with for decades. I know these guys. He goes, I've never seen anybody, talk so highly about a young officer. And, well, you must. And he goes, I can't, Captain Smith signed off on this. And I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm thinking, great. Well, next question, where do you want to send me, sir?
Yeah.
And, uh, and no, he goes, hey, listen, before I sign this, I just have one question for you. And I said, yes, sir. He said, when you go in, he goes, and I have no doubt you are going to become a platoon commander, probably before most people do. He goes, you've got that kind of drive. He said, but what I want to know is, when you're in that submarine, and you and your guys are ready, and he goes, you've been briefed, and you're the only one that has the full brief. Your XO has the he goes, your senior chief has the has partial brief, but the full objective. He said, and then when you guys lock out in the sub and the pressurization hits and your ear blows, he said, what am I going to be able to tell that chief who now has to go on with a mission and he doesn't have all the information there? He goes, what should I tell him? He goes, that I knowingly put in somebody that has a potential issue. I mean, Mr. Larkin, what would you do? And I was like, fuck, I was sitting there going, well, sir, I wouldn't sign that paper. And he goes, yeah, that's the hard thing. He goes, it really is the hard thing. He goes, I think you're right, Mr. Larkin. I don't think I can sign this paper. But he worked it out for me, and it dropped all of my pretenses. And it was this idea of, hey, listen, we love you. We think you're great.
Yeah.
We know you do great work. We know you probably could do 90% of what you're asked with no problem. But you've got an issue that we can't overlook because of our mission. And at that point, diving is our mission. And, but the way he did it to me was he didn't say no.
Mm-hmm.
He gave me everything. And then, ethically, how could I say yes?
Right. Yeah.
And that made me okay with the ultimate, and it stopped he basically wanted me to stop trying to weasel my way around.
Yeah.
And the problem was, back then you couldn't do lateral transfers to like the Army and get into Spec Ops because there was no direct path. They were still discouraging, like you said, Army officers from going in there. Now you can do all of that, but back then that wasn't an option.
Yeah.
So I stayed in, but I just think that's I just want people to understand that, the integrity level that you meet. My father told me this in the military. He goes, hey, listen, he said, you're going to meet, he goes, the top 5% of people that you're going to meet in the military, he goes, they're unlike anybody else you're going to meet in the rest of your life. He goes, I just guarantee. He goes, you won't meet them in the civilian world. You'll meet great people, but you'll never meet people that just rise to the level of these people. And I have to say, I had the pleasure of working with individuals like that I probably, if I'd gone the traditional career, I never would have met guys like that at that age.
Yeah.
And it really helped craft for me, kind of how I did things after that. So anyways, I just
what
wanted
a great
to
story.
share that.
Yeah. That's a great story. Well, let's get into your training, paradigm and
Yeah.
everything, and then how you got, because you kind of alluded to that when you talked about like the first time you had really been dumped on your ass with an injury that you couldn't,
Yeah.
like a real, not hurt but injured, like where you couldn't fight
Well,
through it. So how did that develop your training focus?
so I went when I was commissioned. I had already had 3 different black belts in Korean
Hmm.
arts and judo. Plus, my grandfather taught me boxing since I was a young kid. I'd fought in Golden Gloves in San Diego, and it was great. I loved all the combat sports, so I was proficient. On that command that I told you about, one of the things they looked at was the wall came down. The Soviet Union all of a sudden just disintegrated, and they
Hmm.
had to look at warfare that was coming up. And one of the things they realized was, hey, the world's going to change. We're going to go back into more tribal type wars and grudge wars,
Hmm.
stuff that we haven't faced in over 60 years. Really with the Soviets. Because now they don't have the hold over these areas, and they predicted like Bosnia Herzegovina all before
Hmm.
it ever happened. These guys were
Yeah.
really thinking ahead, and they said
Yeah.
one of the things we have to do is we have to train to be putting our hands on people again. Which is, the close quarter battle that they did back in those days was never with the idea that you would ever have to use hands or hand to hand combat or anything like that. It was seen that if it got to that level, you completely failed. So they kind of just
Hmm.
ignored it. They hadn't
Yep.
trained that really seriously since Vietnam.
Hmm.
And this was all pre UFC also. And
Yeah.
so
Right.
what I got into was because of my martial arts background, not because I had any ability to have an opinion or any battle, uh, seasoning at all. They just liked me because I was younger. I was a good martial artist, and I was basically a really effective young meat puppet for them.
Hmm.
And so they put together a pilot program where we're bringing in martial artists and hand to hand combat people from all over the world, looking for a system that we could start incorporating into the teams. And it was fascinating. I got to meet some of the top martial artists of the day, some fantastic athletes, and it was really good. But the one thing that we were consistently running into was that you didn't have something that would work with the kit that we had to wear, and
Hmm.
everything. As soon as we started putting everything back on that our daily we'd be working, and a lot of what we were taught was very impractical. And transitioning to a weapon was like they
Yeah.
most places, most of those people didn't have anything back then
Yeah.
for that. So that was where the failure was. Well, I got a call from a buddy of mine, the DEA, because I used to liaison with the DEA a lot. And it was really funny. Like everybody kind of knew we were doing this program. Everybody in my little circle kind of knew. And I just remember the call. This guy's a hardcore DEA agent. He calls me up and he goes, "Hey, man," he goes, "You guys still doing that punchy kicky bullshit?" And I started laughing. And I go, "I'm sorry. Can you swear on your thing? I
No,
don't
yeah,
mean to
you're
use
good. You're good.
You're
No, you're
okay.
good.
Okay. Sorry.
You're
I
good.
should have asked. It's just, that's the way they talk. And I said, yeah, yeah, asshole, we're still doing it, blah, blah, blah. He goes, well, listen, he goes, we just did a quick training with a guy. He goes, he's former Army. He said he has a studio on Gresham in Pacific Beach. Now, I lived in Pacific Beach, California. Pacific Beach is a subset of San Diego. It's like old, back then it was old biker beach town. You get a really cheap place and stuff. And,
Yeah.
it usually had, officers like me and other, no goods that were down there. And I'm sitting here thinking, this guy's got to be screwing with me. We're flying people in from all over the world. And he's telling me that literally 4 blocks away from where I live, there's a studio that I should go see on Gresham. Are you kidding me? And so he goes, no, listen, he goes, this guy's an asshole. He goes, but you get along really well with assholes. And that sounds like he was giving me a slam. He was, but he's also giving me a compliment, because that is one
Yeah.
thing that is kind of followed me since I was a kid. And I think my grandfather helped me with this. I'm very comfortable around asocial personalities. I'm really
Hmm.
people that are very um, violent. They don't suffer fools. They're very well
Hmm.
trained, but they're kind of those guys. Hey, break in case of war. They don't really mix in well with polite
Yeah.
company. Um, I can talk to those people in a way where they feel comfortable talking to me, not because I'm like them. It's because I
Hmm.
don't try to be like them. I actually
Yeah.
I honestly am curious, and their outlooks on training and stuff like that. And oftentimes, you know, they have contempt for the normal ways of doing things. And anyways, and this guy was a perfect poster child for that. So I go down, and the studio's closed when I go there, and I was like, I wasn't going to come back. You know, it looked like it did. I mean, I'm telling you, Mark, it was this dingy little. So almost my office is a little bit smaller than it was right now, and it
Yeah.
didn't even have mats. It had carpet. You know, like
Oh,
carpet on
sweet.
there.
Yeah.
And the only reason that I stayed was I saw this trifold, like this little trifold brochure that was taped, literally taped to the window. And on the thing, I looked at it, and it read, he had give a little bit of background of the guy. Didn't give a picture or anything, just give a little bit of background. And the thing that caught me was it said he was a member of the 173rd Charlie in Vietnam. And 173rd Charlie, the one thing I knew about those guys was they were jungle fighters, and Westmoreland just kept them out in the jungle, and that these guys truly were real. You know, they saw a lot of combat, and you know, there's a lot of history there. And once and Charlie itself was there, and then also I come to learn that he was one of the tunnel rats, and so he got in. And he would actually go down into the tunnels, and you know, with a K-bar basically, or 45 in a flashlight, and just, you know, go in and clear those tunnels.
So like a short,
So
compact little dude.
yeah, like 100. He was like 145
Yeah.
pounds soaking wet, just kind of like a
Yeah.
surfer looking guy. So I do. So I go in, and I got my modified grooming standards. So I kind of blend in. I still look like a San Diego surfer, and you know, I'm from there. I went to school in San Diego, so you know, I kind of know. I know how to look local. And so I walk in, and I just start watching this class, and they had gis on, traditional gis. But man, their movements and everything they were doing, it was like nothing I did. The only time I saw that was my uncles were really, you know, they're very adept at fighting in Boston. And I would see once in a while when they'd get in fights in what real violence looked like and stuff, and how quick it was. And these guys were mimicking things. I saw a guy, you know, he came in, he slammed a guy with his ulna to the side of the neck, you know, mimicking. We're not going full blast.
Yeah.
They were doing it. Comb grabs the guy's hair, knees him into the solar plexus. As the guy goes down, out of nowhere comes a rubber knife, and this guy starts stabbing him in the neck and dropping him, and then getting right in the next guy. And I'm going, holy crap, this is exactly the type of stuff we're looking for. And the way it was laid out, I could just tell I'd seen people get hit like that for real, and it was very different than what you saw like in combat sports and stuff.
Yeah.
So anyways, it caught my attention immediately. I'm going, man, I can't wait to meet this instructor. And so I don't see an instructor. I just see these kids. There's a guy kind of leading the class, but I could tell he wasn't the lead guy. I think he had a brown belt on. And then I see a guy in the back. He's got flip-flops on. He's got, you know, like jeans, like old 501s. And he's got an Aloha shirt on. And he's got like a scruffy beard, and his hair's down around there. I figured, oh, the janitor's here, you know? And, but then I see this guy, he goes up, he whispers in one guy's ear, he whispers to another guy, they make adjustments, and I go, oh shit. This guy comes down, sits next to me, doesn't say anything to me, just sits down, watches me for a while, and then just, you know, gives me one of those that individuals like this are. They'll give you a barb, you know, they'll say, hey, you know, what do you want? You know, what are you doing here for? And so I go, hey, I'm just here to learn, blah, blah, blah. I end up training with this guy for 6 months. I don't say anything to anybody at the command, because here I am, this, you know, guy that blew his ears, who's worthless and can't even go to the basic teams. And what am I going to say? Oh yeah, guys, I know you guys are all the legends, but I found him. Here he is. You know, no way.
Yeah.
But what they noticed was I was moving differently when we trained, because we trained at least 2 to 3 times a week, whatever version of hand-to-hand combat we were working on. And they just noticed I was doing things a little bit differently. And of course, some of the senior chiefs and the master chief especially, you know, went over to me and go, what are you doing? I go, what? They go, well, you're doing something. Where are you training? And I go, well, I'm training at this place. Who is it? I go, it's this guy that, you know, and I named Ray, the DEA guy. Ray told me about this guy that they worked with. They, okay, where is he? And I go, he's in Pacific Beach. They go, really? And I go, yeah, Pacific Beach. I go, a couple of blocks away. And I go, well, he's an Army guy. And, you know, I tell him the whole thing, hoping to discourage him, because I don't want to be responsible for this.
Yeah.
And they say, oh no, they go, you got to bring him in. And the thing I didn't tell them that he made very clear to me was, not only was he Army, not only was he a tunnel rat, not only was he 173rd Charlie, but he hated lifers. He thought lifers were worthless. Why the hell would you want to have a career in the military? Thought you're an idiot. And in particular, he hated the SEALs because he thought they got way too much credit, and that they did the real, that he and his boys did the real work and the team guys didn't. Well, so I'm dreading this. I got to take him in, and we're going to take him into the skiff to talk to him. They had already checked his bona fides. They pulled his DD-214. They pulled everything on the guy, and they were psyched. They were psyched to meet him, just because they were all from the same era. And I have to say, my worries were assuaged as soon as they started talking, because like understands like, and these guys were very respectful of the unit and stuff. And then, Jerry calmed down and he got in there right away, and it was good. It was really good. But what I try to tell people all the time is what got the initial pilot program in that program that, became target focused training later had nothing to do with hand-to-hand combat. It had to do with a CQB problem that then Team 6 had years ago on a shipboarding. They had gone and take over shipboarding that had been taken over by pirates. They were going into a hatch on the door, and they lined up just typical lineup that you see the teams. Number 1 gets in. Number 2, they were using MP5s at the time. He gets jammed up with his MP5 basically in the hatch. Number 1's fighting for his life in there, taking these guys on. The rest of the line can't get in. Yeah. And so the way the guy was backed up, and so they're describing this problem to Jerry, and before they're even done with the problem, he lines everybody up, like all these guys that are in there with him. There's about 8 of them. He lines them all up just like the situation. They replicate what happened there, and he goes to the guy that's getting jammed up. He says, "Drop back," and the guy drops back, pulls center, clears the hatch. The rest of the guys go in, and then this guy, by dropping back, his weapon pulls center line right into the guy that was jamming him, and could easily shot. And they were just dumbfounded because it had been something that is very simple. It wasn't anything crazy. It's something that it's a principle that we talk about. The idea when you go after somebody, if you're going after somebody with a weapon, you never pull. You always push to the ground. You have a push to the ground if you're going, meaning when you're striking, you don't ever want to pull back, because you could always pull center line. So it was a principle that he violated. And what was interesting was Jerry wasn't up on the latest weapons or anything. He didn't know the nomenclature of any of the latest stuff. His knowledge was all Vietnam era stuff. Yeah. And so here he was able to answer something that the best minds hadn't been able to figure out before that. And that's what got the pilot program going, because what he did at that level was he understood arcs and angles that very few people saw. He was a savant that way. He wasn't formally educated. But what's interesting was marrying him at Basic Underwater Demolition School and Spec War Comm, and the assets that were available. We had we had just brought on a whole sports medicine group that was analyzing training and everything. When they saw the hand-to-hand combat, Jerry was basically teaching injury to the human body. He understood that when you put trauma in the human body of a high enough spike, that the body goes in and gives basically a spinal reflex reaction, meaning the trauma spike, say you've all experienced, if you touch a hot surface, your hand automatically comes off, and then you realize, I burnt myself. But during that time from when you touch and the stimulus starts, it goes up, the stimulus goes up, and then it goes up your spine. But the stimulus, because it's so severe, another message goes right down the spine before it gets to the brain and says, move it. And so you have this reflex reaction to pull it away. And during that time, the brain's disengaged. It can't, even if it wants to do something, it can't. It has to react to that thing. Same thing if you step on a sharp object, your foot automatically comes up. Yeah. Well, he used this to basically, his whole thing was he understood that if the guy can't think and use his brain, then he can't command anything. So I can keep him busy with trauma, and then I can stack these traumas until he is, non-functional, basically. And that was really the simple premise that he had. What we were able to do with the sports medicine guys is validate everything and also map out the human body to say, okay, there are nerves, bones, and organs that you can strike on the human body where you're either breaking structure or you're going after a sensory system that if you're successful with putting the trauma into it, you will get one of these reactions and you will take the brain out of the equation. So it's a cheat code to make sure that you don't find out how good somebody is at what they do. Meaning, you can bypass bigger, faster, stronger by putting injuries on them.
Yep.
And so that was the nexus of what we started back then, and that's what we built off. We did a pilot course. We trained 230 instructors in the special operations community. It went through all NATO and everything, and it was really, really well received. The issue is how long did he was my instructor ended up being a victim of his own success, meaning he just was a hard personality to deal with. Yeah. And once he got some outside people started offering him a lot of money when he found out he was training the SEALs, and he started to, not take care of the teams and not take care of people again. He went back to his old self. And so then the teams will obviously move on. They moved on to Dwayne Dieter and then some other groups that they used after that. So he did that. But the premise of injury of the human body, for me, was just seminal, because the big question, the biggest fear that we always have is somebody bigger, faster, and stronger dominating us. And most of what you see in combat sports, reality, self-defense, and all that other stuff, it's still heavily reliant on strength. I see people all the time like getting into these things where they're getting into these wrestling matches. I'm like, that is a recipe for disaster, because the assumption when I train anybody is, okay, I assume it's going to be multiple attackers. I assume those attackers are going to be bigger, faster, and stronger. And I assume they're going to be carrying tools, weapons. So that's my baseline for somebody. So if I already know they're bigger, faster, and stronger than me, they're more, I don't want to get into a strength match, and I don't want to rely on athleticism. When we put this thing together, the parameters that the team guys gave Jerry was, hey, listen, make this for a guy who's been at least minimum 60 days in country, mildly to probably partially dehydrated, sleep schedules all over the place, and also any athleticism he came with is gone, at that point. So what he can rely on his body weight and any kit that he's carrying. And so that was the parameters that we worked off of. And we also worked on every surface. We worked on concrete. We worked on sand. Sand was our primary training. Obviously, it was Coronado, so we trained in the Silver Strand. Grass and gravel. We train on all of those. We really didn't train on artificial surfaces like mats or anything like that. And that's not like being hardcore. It's just when you train on real surfaces and you understand how much the planet can help you out, and you also you won't do things that you would do on a matted surface, because you get away with a lot on a matted surface that you can't do when you're really using things. So it helps the believability factor also, because you're feeling what it's like to just go down at a slower rate on concrete because your partner's taking care of you, and you're like, I don't want any more of that. That would suck.
I can't remember where I read this, but I came up with, it was someone that was kind of in combatives, but they kind of said the same thing. They said the mat will lie to you. The mat is not your friend. Like the mat, we understand why we use it and everything, allows you to train longer and everything, but it does give you that false sense of security about what you can do, what even types of takedowns and things like that you could submit yourself to, that in real life out on a concrete surface or something, you just wouldn't do that. You wouldn't have the capacity to do that,
Yeah. And I'm always careful, like I live in Vegas and I have great friends in the UFC. I know a lot of the top executives and I know a lot of the fighters and stuff. And I love combat sports. I go to as much as I can. My kids they all have a baseline. Well, the first thing that I have my kids do, people always ask, what do you have your kids do? And I said, I always have them do gymnastics first. And the reason I have them do gymnastics is young kids, I start them at 3-4 on that. That gives them that center. They understand their balance and their center of gravity really well. And it gives them really good basic foundational athleticism. Then I move them into, now I move them in immediately. Would have been years ago, I would have done judo, but now I do all my Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I have great instructors that are out here. And my kids all do jiu-jitsu. Why? I want them to get used to being grabbed. Especially I have twin daughters that are 10. I want them to be used to being, grabbed. And then I would move them on. So I'm very pro combat sports, and I'm very pro combat sports were great to me, taught me a lot of things. And there are a lot of great instructors out there. One is not better than the other. It's just when you're in a situation where you you're up against somebody where you make the assumptions that I talked about. You can't assume that the other guy is going to use any sort of rule-based approach to
Right.
violence.
Yep.
And you have to remember, that what makes combat sports so great, and the way you gamify violence, it's a very simple standard. You have to take away direct injury to the human body. And last time I looked at the UFC rules, there were 31 of them. 21 of those rules were outlawing direct injury to the human body.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And the reason is you're not trying, there's no place in deliberate direct injury to the human body in a combat sport application. That's not your goal. Your goal is not to maim,
Right.
cripple, and kill the other guy. It's to better him, put skill against skill. That's why I have weight classes and defined areas and everything. It's fantastic. And quite frankly, some of the best individuals I've ever trained were highly trained MMA practitioners or jiu-jitsu practitioners, combat sport athletes, because all I have to do is change a couple of parameters for them, and they have already got the drive. They've already got the will. They know how to do it. And now I say, hey, instead of that being a submission move, we're going to make it a joint break. And I just show them how to drop through the joint and do something like that. And this is what you get out of that thing. And they get it really quick. I think the big problem right now is we ask the wrong questions. It's like, my kung fu is better than your karate, or this no. It's what's objective? Here, what's some good objective information? And what I try to tell people is the gold standard, if your life's on the line, that you should rely on is a great place to start is sports injury data. And the reason you want to look at sports injury data is because the two components, it is humans colliding with humans, the injuries provided when two humans collide, and then also when humans collide with the planet. And those are forces that you and I can replicate. And the same areas of the human body keep showing up in that data. And when you understand that, you go, oh, okay, so now this is where I can target. These are the areas that if I put my effort into these areas, I'm going to get a disproportional response to this that's going to be beneficial to me.
Right.
And so it's really just basically re-engineering injury to the human body.
I mean, that's one way to do it, but we all know you could just go on YouTube and just watch, Master Ken and do what he does, and that's the same thing, right? I don't have to study
he's
all
funny,
this
actually. He's a really interesting guy. I haven't had a chance to talk, but I heard him in an interview talk about what motivated him. He's actually a martial artist, and he
really?
came up with that thing mainly because he said there were all these. He goes back when he grew up prior to the UFC. He goes, you had all these people, and it was like, mine's the best, yours is the worst. That's where he came in. He goes, but it was all these guys that were theorists. Like there's no proof to what they were talking about, that something would work or not. And that's what he wanted to model and go. So he's actually right on a lot of it, on a lot of his approach. My whole thing, the reason I want to use sports injury data is because that's demonstrable. You see it all the time. People will say to me, well, if target focus training is so devastating, how come you don't see guys in the UFC use it? And I go, oh, no, it's undefeated in the UFC. I go, you see it all the time. And they're like, what? And so then I just start pointing out all the injuries. A guy rolls up and snaps a guy's ankle. A guy, inadvertently, gouges a guy's eye. A clavicle gets broken or something. And what happens? They stop the competition immediately. And what's really interesting is humans recognize real violence. If you listen to the crowd, you got two guys going at it just epically, boom, and they're cheering at every hard hit and everything like that. And then an injury happens. And nobody's cheering. Everybody goes, ooh. And they go internal because they can feel that. They understand that's not right. He's not going to jump up from that. And then you go, hey, here's this great athlete. Now I'm worried about him, and that's real violence. And so that's what I try to tell people. It's like, no, it's not. I totally understand when people say you see a lot of these, reality self-defense guys who usually look like they spend a lot of time at fast food places. And they talk about how, devastating their art is and how it's too dangerous for this or that. Yes, I totally understand those guys. And I understand how you can dismiss that. And it is there. But the problem is you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And injury to the human body is the gold standard. And where I go for a lot of my information, where I've got for my books and everything, is one of the really great learning places that I found out the brutal use of injury to the human body is in the federal penitentiaries, and it's mainly how the prison gangs use violence, and they're very methodical about it. It's very it's not chaotic, meaning a lot of people, like if you look at something like the HBO show that used to be on about penitentiaries, or anything like that, they try to make it seem like everything's crazy and violence just happens. No, it has to be sanctioned there, because the main thing of a penitentiary is to make money. They want to control the yard. They want to sell drugs. They want to sell access to things. And you can't do that if they're locking you down all the time. Right. So violence is very judicious. Now, when they do use violence, they want to make sure they're successful using violence. And they basically, even though they're not medically educated, they learn that, hey, there are areas in the human body that if we're going to use a shank, and we got to make sure we kill this guy because we've been commissioned by somebody on the outside to take this guy out for for a witness or something like that, or he's going to testify against somebody. They got to make sure it gets worked. The Aryan Brotherhood had something happen. I believe it was in the late 80s. There was a guy going to testify, and they were hired by another group to take this guy out. Two guys got in, they stabbed a guy. It was frantic the way they did it. The guy dropped, but he survived. And they moved him into protective custody, moved him to another thing, and getting another shot at him was impossible. So an edict came down from leadership and said, this will not happen again. We cannot afford to get it wrong. You guys will study anatomy. And so they were all getting like Gray's Anatomy, and they were looking at specific areas, not learning it from a medical sense. They were learning, okay, where do I put my effort? And it was all these areas, especially with using something to have somebody rapidly bleed out. They needed to know where to go in the human body to get that. And so what you find across the board with these guys, when you talk to them and you ask them about specific information, they're always talking about where on the human body to go. It's very, so people that have to get it right, they always talk about targeting and trauma and where it goes. It's never a question of trying to hurt a guy or knock him out.
Right,
There's nothing non-specific about what they're doing on the human body. They don't just hit the head or something like that.
So let me ask you a couple questions. So for somebody who's starting out, or they're considering kind of getting it, they're like, yeah, man, that makes a lot of sense, right? Don't worry about just trying to hurt the guy. I need to cause an injury. If I'm in a life-threatening situation and I need to go that far. So if they're looking at your program, like, how do you validate where you're at? So like going to certain systems, say jiu-jitsu, say, they have a belt system. Now, that doesn't mean you could be a black belt, but you can go buy one off of Amazon. I mean, that doesn't, but if you put the time in, again, that's not a validation, but at least there's an objective metric where someone who's quote unquote mastered the art can look at you and can say, yeah, you're doing the techniques right. You've been training X amount of time, and that you can hold your own in a match. Now, you're not eye gouging anybody, but as far as applying the technique, when your system, or the system that you've trained, right, how do you validate that? Because the whole point is you can't actually attack someone full on with those techniques because you would injure them. So how would I know that I got it, so to say?
Well, listen, before I did any of this type of training, like I told you, I had 3 different black belts, and I competed all the time, and I was in there. I highly recommend that. I highly recommend combat sports, because you're going to understand that. What's interesting is when you are good at your combat sport and then you're introduced to injury to the human body, you get it because you've had either you've been injured before or you felt the potential for injury in something where somebody screwed up and they did something they weren't supposed to do. And your knee flexes back real quick, but it comes back. But you realize, oh shit, a little bit more, and I would have snapped and stuff like this. So you have inherently that knowledge. So yes, I understand exactly what you're saying. You should. I disagree with pressure testing the way people talk about it. I think it's ridiculous the way most people do it. It's just designed to scare the crap out of somebody and make an instructor look really tough. Like when they're doing it. It's. I can talk more about that later. But what I'm saying is, you want to do that. Where you validate it is, luckily. And you understand how I'm saying luckily. The internet came around. CCTV is all over the place, and we're capturing tons of acts of violence. And
Mm-hmm.
you see when these areas of the human body that you're training get struck
Mm-hmm.
time and time again, and what the reaction is. And you're seeing against big people, small people, all over. And you're
Mm-hmm.
seeing that these are true reactions that people do, that when you put the effort in. And the juxtaposition, the hard part is training. We train basically, it's the equivalent of what now the spec ops community talks about all the time in training, which is crawl, walk, run.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is I would zero in your human weapon system, which is all your brain and body first. When
Mm-hmm.
you're doing that, you do it the same way you do when you train firearms.
Yeah.
I like when I introduce the concept to people, especially combat operators who are skeptical about going slow at first.
Yeah.
I say, okay, well, how many people have taught firearms or learned firearms training? And they're all like, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
great. So first time you were talking, you got the brief. And I said, they made sure you were safe. You understood where it came out. And I said, first thing they did was once you're cleared safe, I said they
Mm-hmm.
then switched out. They gave you a sim gun, and I said they put the sim rounds in there, loaded you up, put your goggles on. I said, took you to kill house, opened the door, kicked you in, and then red team started shooting at you right away. And they're looking at me, what? And I go, no, yeah, right. That's how you learned, right? And they go, oh, well, if you did learn that way, how good a shot do you think you'd be? You go, fuck, you'd be
Yeah.
terrible.
Train like you
Blah, blah, blah.
fight, right? That's what you
Yeah.
always
It's
hear.
like,
Train like you
and I go,
fight.
okay, so how do
Yeah.
you train? And then and of course, those guys I don't have to do it. With civilians that haven't trained, I have to walk them through it. The idea of,
Yeah.
okay, well, first, if you got a good instructor, he's probably going to have you dry fire. He's going to look at your trigger
Mm-hmm.
press. And then, once he feels comfortable with that, he's probably going to put a round in, let you send it down range. He's going to look at what you do. Then he'll start working on you with a little bit of recoil management. He'll do that. And if you're successful, he'll then make a challenge. Maybe he'll have you put 2 rounds down or something. And once
Mm-hmm.
he feels, okay, I like that group, he'll put a challenge into you. Maybe he'll change your position. Maybe you'll have something move forward, or you'll move in there.
Mm-hmm.
But every time that group starts to spread, what do you take away? You take away speed, and you go right back down. Speed is something that you earn.
Yeah.
Accuracy and correctness is what you want to lock in first.
Yeah.
And so why we don't do this with our own human weapon system is just amazing to me. I have these clips that I used from Rogan's show. He had Baz Rutten on, and one of them was Baz was on Joe's show, and then also I take a clip from Mike Tyson, how Cus D'Amato taught him, and then Conor McGregor, when Conor McGregor was doing a lot of slow, deliberate training. His whole thing is precision beats power. What is it? Precision beats power, and accuracy beats speed. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do they mean by that? They mean by actually making sure that you take the time to coordinate your tools so you get that 1 square inch on that 1 square inch that you want. There's huge results to that. Baz Rutten talks about before he was a heavyweight champ, he would take a Muay Thai bag, and he would to condition his shin, he would go, the bag, the lower down on the bag, the harder the bag is, because the sand all, pulls down. So he'd go up in a bag, he'd draw a line around that part of the bag, and he'd start, conditioning his shin. Then he'd move it down, a little bit, maybe just an inch. And that's how he'd get conditioned. But then he figured out, he goes, hey, this is actually really helping me. I have to be very specific on where I'm putting my shin. Maybe I should apply that, in fighting. And what he talked about, he goes, he'd look at a guy's shorts, and he'd go right for the logo. He'd get right, and then a specific part of the logo, and he'd come in, because he realized, if I hit the same place multiple times, 3 kicks, I can take this guy's leg out, and he's done, and I win. Yeah. It was his accuracy and correctness that he got. So he saw that as a fighter. He realized, before, I would see a silhouette, and I'd just hit the silhouette. He goes, after I started changing and realizing that he called it accuracy. Once I started really training accuracy, he goes, that's when I leapfrogged into this amazing fighter. Same thing with Conor when he was at his top. This idea of probably the best we ever saw was when he took out Aldo, where he just came right in, knew exactly where he was going to go, and he got exactly what he wanted. And then Mike Tyson talked about the number system that Cus D'Amato had, where he would call out numbers, and it was all related to parts of the body, liver, spleen. He just had everything. And you see these professionals. So you see the guys at the highest levels are doing this.
Yeah.
But most of the combat sport and martial arts world, at the base levels, it's only the best of the best that are applying these standards. And yet this is how you should start off. because if you put the time into accuracy and correctness, then everything else is easy after that, because whatever your hard and fast is right now, you have that. We don't have to worry about your hard and fast. Now we can improve conditioning and all that other stuff. But what we can't do is, can you put it where you want it? Can I take that 1 square inch of me on my ulna and can I put it on that 1 square inch of him that I want right now? Have I trained that? And so the idea is like, you don't go slow because it's weak or safe. You go slow because that's how you start building that idea, that eye-hand coordination that you want for each part of these tools. And you don't have to do it long, But the idea is, if we don't do that, then if we want to go hard and fast, we can't go to these vulnerable areas of the human body, because if we go to these vulnerable areas of the human body, we're going to lose our training partner. So we'll hit the non-specific areas of the body hard and fast and do all this, and we feel good about that, but does it really get us anywhere? And so that's just juxtaposition that we got to do.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but so I have another question about the system. So are there any, so it sounds very lethal to me, right? Even though, most people would think of dealing with empty hands being less than lethal force. And, according to the law, most jurisdictions it would be, but, you're targeting places that just going to immediately, you're going to injure someone, maybe permanently, maybe even kill them, right? Depending on where it's placed. Is there any less than lethal techniques too? Because I'm thinking in terms of, what if someone wanted to learn the system because they want to be able to shut down a bigger, stronger opponent, but there may be situations where maybe you're a principal or a school teacher, and now you've got an unruly student that you need to lay hands on, but you don't want to like destroy their trachea or something. Is there anything in your system that also contemplates a less, you see what I'm saying? Less,
oh yeah. No, it's very, I get the question all the time, and I totally understand where it's coming from. The problem is that we have to understand that once we cross the physical plane on another human being, we have no idea how it's going to end up. I collect a lot of stories of 2 guys that get together, get in an argument, and one guy pushes the other guy. He falls over, hits his head, and he bleeds out, dead. I'll show 2 things. There's a juxtaposition I show in one of my presentations where I show these 2 guys in Russia, 2 big old country boys, and I mean, they get in the epic brawl, and I mean, boom, just slamming each other. It looked like 2 like NFL linebacker or linemen going at it, and you're sitting there, how can the guy still get up, and they go to where finally one guy just collapses and he's bleeding and he's done. But you see about a minute later, he gets up and they can stagger and he staggers away. Okay. And this was out in the street. They both walk away. I then show another one of a bar in Arkansas where 2 guys are going, they're talking to each other. One guy just hits the other guy, nails him perfectly. The guy bounces his head off the concrete. Boom, that's it. He's dead. Okay. You saw just there an epic battle where that could have happened at any point, but it didn't. They got lucky.
Yep.
And then you see this. And so there's that idea, like, you'd sit there and say, well, what about the solar plexus? Yes, all things equal. If you hit somebody in the solar plexus, we've probably all experienced, even if you haven't been punched the solar plexus, maybe you took a kickball or you hit yourself. And, basically, it's hard for you to breathe in. It's easy for you to breathe out. That's why people run around going, I can't breathe. Because they have little trips of air. All things being equal, a person will recover from that. As soon as it stops spasming, it'll release and you go back to breathing. But you're at your sister's wedding, and that idiot drunk uncle of yours, again, he's ruining it for everybody. He's being really abusive towards his wife and everything. And you're like, you know what? Got to get this guy out of here. I just want to shut him up, everybody, And so I'm going to be the hero. And I go up and I just, boom, elbow him right into the solar plexus, and I get that response perfectly. He goes from being that aggressive jerk to now he's sucking for air. But then all of a sudden, he's turning purple. He's clutching his chest. Even though he looks like Schwarzenegger in his prime, you had no idea that your uncle has a genetically bad heart and that you just caused an arrhythmia. And now he's dropped. And at minimum, you're looking at manslaughter on this, that you're going into. Now, the reason I say this is because there's this illusion. Like, people think about choking guys out. I've got tons. One of my guys was a attorney. And he did research for other attorneys, his business. He made a lot of money doing research for cases. So he'd send me all of these reports of guys using chokes,
Mm-hmm.
LVNRs and stuff on people, and they were dying. And the reason they were dying wasn't because the guy was doing the choke wrong or anything. It's that people have different responses to having their blood cut off. Some people, you can do it, no problem at all, but there are a part of the population that you do that to, and they're going to have a really lethal result to that right away.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, if you are going to cross into that physical plane and put something on, you better have a threshold where it's justified. That's my whole thing. It's really educating people on, why do you want to take action? Do you want to take action because of your ego? And I don't mean ego can be a lot of different things. Being insulted, being made fun of, but you still have choice. My defining measure on when I would ever put my hands on somebody is, it comes down to choice. If I have choice, the choice is always to leave. Even if I'm going to feel like, I'm humiliated, people call me names or whatever. It's when you don't have a choice, that is where the only tool left to you at that point is violence. And so no matter what happens, I tell everybody, there's something that really a lot of people responded to, and I call it the 3-day rule. And when we're talking about events like this, whatever you're imagining right now that you had to do, 3 days later, if you're sitting in a jail cell facing charges, or you're 6 feet under, would you tell yourself, yeah, I had no choice, I had to do what I did? And a lot of people don't put that kind of thought into responding, especially, they get impulsive, they do this, and they never anticipate. I had one recently that I did a whole video presentation on. It was really sad. It was in Minnesota. It was a coach for girls hockey team, really successful coach, by all accounts, the nicest guy in the world. And it was during COVID, and a guy came into the bar. It was kind of like a family diner bar that he was there. And this guy came into the urinal when the guy was there. And this is when they were like, every other urinal they'd cover up for spacing. And this guy came in, he was drunk and he was mad, and he just ripped the plastic off the urinal. The coach is, down the way watching this guy just be obnoxious and everything, thinking to himself, what an ass, but he didn't say anything. And he goes out. As he goes out, sits with his group. This guy then comes out, wasn't targeting the coach per se, but he's just being obnoxious, saying a lot of things. And then he said something to somebody in their, I think it was a woman, he said in their group, and that was it for this guy. So this guy gets up, kind of protests. They walk outside, they go back and forth, blah, blah, blah. And sure enough, the one guy steps in, just pushes him. The coach ends up going back, falling down concrete steps that are behind there and dying. Yeah. The other guy gets, prosecuted. He's in, and now they're dealing with this. And again, people are saying, people, when you look at something like that and you look at what he lost and his family and everything, you go, really, was it worth it? Not that the guy wasn't obnoxious, not that he wasn't maybe justified in thinking this guy's a jerk, but when he actually took action to do something, put himself in that situation, neither side ever saw that outcome.
Yep.
And we just have to think, violence isn't this tool we can just like go and hope for the best. I assume every time I put my hands on somebody, I could potentially kill them, or I could be killed.
Yeah.
And that's a threshold you have to have. And then you make much better decisions when you're trained that way. The reason I show all the things that can happen to the human body is because most people don't understand trauma to the human body. There was a case where a cop in Australia, I was training these cops, and they were he was arresting a guy. And when he was arresting a guy, he had his knee right above his spleen when he was trying to get in the arrest, holding the guy down. And he was paying attention to other people that were doing their stuff. And every adjustment he made, he was bouncing up and down with his knee. It ended up bursting the guy's spleen, and the guy ended up bleeding out and dying. And it was all just through ignorance of the officer. The officer didn't mean to do it. He just didn't understand that, hey, by putting your knee in that specific area, because you don't understand the human body, you don't know what's behind. There's this huge blood bag behind there that holds a full unit of blood, that he ended up killing a prisoner that he had no intention of doing that to. So again, by understanding these areas, it makes you much more aware. It does two things. It causes you not to do anything that you don't want to do to somebody, because we often say, hey, listen, if you don't want to do this to a human being, do not do this type of a strike.
Yeah.
But then the counter is there. If your life is on the line and you have to save yourself or save others at that point, and you have that opportunity to go there, you know exactly what you're going to get out of that. And
Yeah.
that's when it would be justified. I tell
Yeah.
people all the time, there's no such thing as self-defense. People use that term all the time. There's no such thing. You don't learn self-defense. We all learn violence because everything is violence. And violence is never at this outcome at the beginning justified. It's after the fact. It is then looked at and judged. If it is judged a judicial use of violence, then it is deemed self-defense and you're fine.
Yep.
If it's deemed criminal, well, now you have to deal with the system on that. But we all are dealing with the same thing. That point where we have to use something is violence, and everybody has to get comfortable with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, we early on you'd mentioned like if someone had a background in a art, then they kind of take to the target focus really quickly because they've got the strikes, they understand the techniques, and they may have already been hurt before, but they seem to appreciate these targets and what can happen to the human body. But it's not necessary that someone have a background to come into your system, is it? I mean, I'm sure you take a lot of folks that become just as adept with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not what all I tell people is I'm not here to replace whatever you've already learned. What I am doing is I see myself as a technical consultant that has some information that I hope you will deem useful. And basically you can take whatever you've learned before, Aikido, karate, BJJ, Muay Thai, whatever it is. And now you got this template of injury that you can put over it. And you can say, hey, does if I did X, Y, and Z that I learned over here, does that result in an injury as these guys define it? If it does, great. We don't have the monopoly on violence, like violence to the human body. All I can do is say, hey, if you're successful doing this to the human body, here's the outcome. How you get there, that's fine. I'm not going to judge you by saying, oh, you did it this way rather than this way. I'm going to say, nope, got the result. Good job. That's just it. So it's not when learning our stuff does not take away from anything that I'm not here to replace your BJJ. I'm not here to replace any of that. It's just giving you technical information on how the human body responds to trauma, and then helping you with methods and principles that will allow you to hone in your targeting, using your human machine, and then using other tools like knives, clubs, going up against firearms, and then also dealing with multiple attackers. So that's kind of the way we go.
Yeah. So you're based in Vegas, right? I think you said.
Yeah. I mean, we do it. I do it all over. Now I'm starting to get back to my national and international schedule, but yes, I'm based in Vegas. And we do have like 6 courses this year in Vegas, and I'll probably have 4 courses outside of Vegas this year.
So what about those that want to train, they take a look at it. Do you have an online kind of program too, or how does that work?
I put all of what we've in the last couple of years, we've created, I've taken all of my online information and then training methodologies that we've had over the years. I've digitized everything and I put it in, and we have a great online community. My goal is to share the information and then also create virtual training options for people where I can have myself or another one of my master instructors lead a class or lead something. So you and your partner can train, but you don't have to train each other. You can actually have somebody, of our level that can do that, rather than it just never was feasible for us. It takes me a minimum of 3 to 5 years to produce an instructor. I can't do that. You can come in 2 days and learn an awful lot for us, but what you're learning is the equivalent of like a CPR class. But the person that I want teaching that CPR class has to have the equivalent in our world of like an MD or something. I want him to have 10 times, a minimum 10 times the knowledge base of everything he's doing.
Yeah.
Nobody would make fun of a CPR class. It's very effective and it's useful for what it's designed for. Violence is a very easy tool to use and understand. It's a very simple tool. It's not hard. If it was, then a lot of the lower IQ individuals that are very successful using violence wouldn't be able to use it. Yeah. You just want to make sure that what you do is effective. And that's the thing. And the value you get from training with us is I put it in a context where a sane, social, good citizen can understand when this horrific information would ever be, valid and useful to you. And that's the main thing. It's like, how do I take something that really is the purview of the criminal world for the most part, the way most people look at it,
Mm-hmm.
and how do I sit there and show a law-abiding person who the last thing in the world they want is violence coming in their life, to use the tools effectively as these people,
Yeah.
and what the things are. I just want to put you on par with the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
the best you can ever get is 50-50 when it comes to violence. It's really who
Yeah.
gets the first injury.
Mm-hmm.
But most people aren't even close to 50-50.
Right. Right. Man, that is fascinating. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. And man, I feel like we just scratched the surface. There's so much more I wanted to talk about. Maybe you could come back on again and we
Oh,
could do a
and please,
round
if
two.
anybody has questions in your group and they want to do it, I'm more than available. I'd be glad to come back and answering them.
Awesome.
And I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity. If they don't know, if you folks don't know who I am, that's fine. Unfortunately, 70% of my clients come to me after something's happened. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
always awesome, Mark, when I can get out to people and they hear something like this, and I'm hoping that nothing's ever happened in their life, and here's some preventative information that they might have found useful. So,
Well, if somebody's wanting to check you out, I mean, obviously they could Google your name, Tim Larkin, but where do
yeah.
you like best people to start?
Yeah, you'll find me, like, I have
Searching.
all my socials and everything. If they want to, I provide a free, and it's not like some scammy thing. It's truly a free report, because I can only train so many people. And if you go to surviveviolence.com, it's just give the email. We'll see if you liked what you're hearing. I send you 11 modules right away that kind of elaborate on what you and I have talked about today. And that's a great way to start, because again,
Mm-hmm.
sure, I'd love everybody to become a customer, but I'd rather have you educated first and
Yeah.
see, hey, does this approach work for you? Because oftentimes there are a lot of people that are just too uncomfortable with violence, and they don't want to understand this. And I understand that, and
Yeah.
I'm not for everybody.
Yeah.
you know?
Well, Tim, man, I had a blast, man. I really thanks for doing the line share, the talking, so people didn't have to suffer through my speech
I tried to
impediment
help
with
you out
my
with that.
retainers, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. It was awesome. But no, man, I mean, I love your work. I love like the whole philosophy by it. I'm a fan of it. I'm sold on it, and I recommend it to other people. So I will put your link in the show notes for the show.
Great.
So if anybody wants to go and find Tim, highly recommend. I mean, at least check him out. I mean, clearly it's a science based. He's going to help you build the skills. So he's got this free program. You can try it out, and then you can decide if you want it or not. But you have nothing to lose. So
Yeah,
highly recommend.
yeah. There's some, and we got tons of. You'll also discover tons of YouTube videos and stuff. So I try to put out as much free information as possible for people, because I think it's just a
Yeah,
really important subject.
yeah. Well, I'm going to give you the last word before we sign off. But first, I have to at least point out to the viewers and listeners that Tim showed up wearing a Pearl Snap tactical or Pearl Snap shirt for Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast. Ironically, I'm not wearing one. I'm kind of embarrassed, but anyway, we appreciate the hat tip to the show. But anyway, before we go, what do you want to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, listen, we're entering into another crazy year. I'm hoping it's not going to be as bad as 2020 was, but I think we're going to be smarter this time. We're not going to fall for a lot of the stuff we saw last time. The biggest challenge that everybody's going to have this year is being able to not get triggered and not to buy
Yeah,
into emotional responses right now. It just leads to tragedy an awful lot of times. And so that's our biggest thing is, can we avoid putting ourselves in situations where we might have to use violence? And that's where it is. I want you to prevent, I want you to do all this stuff, but really I just counsel everybody right now to, it's unfortunately the way things are designed right now with social media. It's designed to trigger us, and it's designed to pit us against each other. And I'm hoping this time around we don't take the bait again.
yeah.
But that's why please get as much of the free information that I'm talking about as you can, because then you're armed. Then you won't fall for this kind of stuff. You'll realize that, hey, listen, I don't have to participate in this. And really, it's just never worth it.
Yeah, that's sound advice. Well, Tim Larkin from Target Focus Training, thanks again for coming on to the show. And
Hey, I
again,
appreciate
gonna
it,
have
Mark.
you back. Would love to have you back. And to all you guys out there, uh, on behalf of Alex, who's not here, but we don't really care about him anyway, and myself, Mark, just be safe and keep it pearl snapped. See you guys.